Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Oak Island Research Channel. After this discovery of what the lead seal was, which I thank Michael, dot to dot, my friend, for relaying that information on his YouTube channel. He's got much more exposure than I do. I do boring thing that, technical decoding of French words. If you don't speak French, it must be very boring, I guess. But again, that's science, science progresses. So, what I found today, I like it a lot. I think I pretty much got the explanation of what is the flood tunnel system, who built it, and how it's built. And that's something into the Oak Island mystery. It's all tied with this word, abwato, which is a French word that I did know about 2 hours ago. And the translation in English of aboiteau is aboiteau. There is no other word in English, and you probably never heard of it because it's a French thing. So I was browsing, just spending time on the history of Nova Scotia and the colonies, the French colonies that were there. And then also a picture into that Wikipedia page. And just like the picture of the Da Vinci painting that just struck my eyes, I was like, wow, what is this? Did the same there. So let's have a look. An abwato is a device that is used originally in the 1500s, 1400s in France to dry out swamps and marshes. And the technology is inherited from the Dutch, because the Dutch had that problem all the time. They had to farm land underneath the level of the sea. So they knew what swamps and marshes were all about. And the colonies in Nova Scotia in 1500, 1600 by the French, most of the people were originating from La Rochelle and Poitiers. That's the area where La Rochefoucauld was from. And that area of France is full of swamps. So they did have the technique for about 100, 150 years to dry out swamps. And those French colonies, made of La Rochelle people, arrived in Nova Scotia in 1600 through several waves of sponsored immigration. It was not like, hey, you want to go to the Newfoundland and have a new life? It was kind of forcing people to go there. There are two villages. Port St. Louis at the time in Nova Scotia was 300 inhabitants. And La Heve, which is right next to Mahoney Bay, which was a French outpost, there was a fort, was 50 inhabitants. But you check La Heve, Heve, on the map, and you can see it's right next to Mahoney Bay. So there was a French, for about 100 years, French activity there from 1600 to 1700 before the Brits kicked us out. And everybody went back to other parts near Quebec and Montreal, and that's how they found Quebec and let the Nova Scotia area to the English. So the Canadians were the only ones to cultivate, to farm land below sea level in North America. They were the only ones in all North America because they imported the technique and because the location they were in was subjected to massive floods, especially in the bay that we'll go over in a second. That bay, the Fundy Bay. You know the Fundy Bay? That's that bay here. And Oak Island is, whereas Lunenburg is here. It's in that bay, right? Let me zoom a little bit. So that Bay of Fundy, this is Annapolis Royal, which was called Port Royal at the time of the French. That's where that settlement of 300 farmers were in. And you have massive tides from the Bay of Fundy. So they used that farming technique in order to control the tides, inherited from the Dutch and used in France for drying out swamps. I'll get back to the technique and the mechanism in a second. And the French not only had in Annapolis Royal a settlement, they had one here, right by Lunenburg and Mahoney Bays right there, right at the tip of the RNG of Lunenburg. So it was really, I checked, it was like 20 nautical miles to go to Oak Island from there. It was really next door. Okay, so how does that abwato works? Aboiteau. I discovered the word again 2 hours ago. So that is a picture I saw on the Wikipedia page, and that's where I struck like, hey, this is like the entry of Oak Island. You got ocean on the right hand side, you got a tunnel with a mechanism and a valve, like a trapdoor there. Trapdoor, hey, trapdoor. Anyways, a mechanism. And that valve allows, if it's in high tide, it will self-lock and forbids the water to get into the farm's land here. That's the swamp here. You want to dry out to be able to farm. So at high tide, it will block the water, but it will also allow the natural rainwater or whatever water remaining from the swamp to slowly go into that reservoir here, the bassin, they call it. The bassin, just like the map of La Rochefoucauld. It's technically called a bassin, and this is technically called a dam, a barrage. So that's very interesting because it also relates somehow to the La Rochefoucauld map. And when you get low tide, the water is going out, sucking with pressure, negative pressure, the water out, and drying out all the water in the swamp that can freely go into the ocean. Every 6 hours, the phenomenon replicates. So 6 hours later in high tide, you're blocking ocean water. You're letting whatever remaining water, flood water, rainwater coming down of the swamp. And then when the tide goes down, it will pull by pressure automatically that trapdoor and let the water out. And that's how they say they can dry out a swamp in 3 years' time. You take a swamp, you want to dry it out to make it farming land. They use that mechanism. You have to be next to the ocean. People from La Rochelle were next to the ocean. And use the ocean tide up and down to suck the water out from the swamp. And it takes 3 years, and you don't have any human activity. You let it work. So in 1600, some French people knew that technology, and the very same French people, 300 of them, were, or maybe 500 total, were in the region of that region of Mahoney Bay and Port Royal, which is Annapolis now. Interesting, huh? You see where I'm going to. Those people knew the technology to dry out a swamp. So a bit more, let's study this. So they took advantage of the natural environment, since the main building material came from the marshes themselves in form of meadow clods or lawns, which they erected to levees. That's for swamp drying. Huh? That's not Oak Island in out and money pit, booby trap, etc. That's just the regular thing. They would use, because they were drying out a swamp, and this is very important in our story, in order to reinforce the mechanism, they would use halophyte plants, which is plants growing in swamps. And because those plants are growing in swamps, they're super resistant to water. They're waterproof. They're dense, and they use the roots, and they would reinforce the waterproof ability of their mechanism by using those plants from the swamp. My idea is that there was no swamp on the islands to begin with. There was 2 islands. They made the swamp. So they didn't have any material such as those marine-soaked environment plant. There was no tree growing in the ocean, and all the trees were on the 2 islands. They couldn't use any swamp. There was no swamp at the time. There was 2 islands. So they had to find another way to waterproof and seal their mechanism. And that's where the coconut fiber comes in the picture, because they didn't have anything around natural. There's no swamp around, I guess, Mahoney Bay, and they use what they had at hand. Why did they have coconut fiber at hand? I'll come in a second with that explanation. Another plant species would not have been able to withstand salt water in and out, especially for 200, 300 years. You need specific, I found a table, I'm not displaying it here, but there's some, just like there's some people crazy about Oak Island or lead seals, there are people crazy about Aboiteau, and they describe the type of plant that are genuinely waterproof enough to withstand the pressure of salt water in the mechanism. Very interesting, huh? We're getting somewhere there. So let's carry on. How did they build that thing? How did they build a abwato? It's a slab, consists of a hollowed out tree trunk placed at the bottom of the sewer canal. Okay, it's reinforced by conifers interspaced with mud. Maybe coconut fiber could do, or some other material. Very important here, it's in red. The abwato must be anchored carefully so that the action of the tide, in, out, with tons of water of pressure does not move it. This is why this lift crosses the sewer channel perpendicular to the entry pipe of water. On Oak Island, we get a structure that's a U-shaped structure. Why would you make a U-shaped structure if you were just to let water in and out freely? You're making a U-shaped structure because you need to reinforce and to strengthen your mechanism that every time the tide goes in and out, those valves will have tremendous pressure that might push the pipes and dislodge them from their original trail, if you wish. So to reinforce that, you put a perpendicular piece so that whatever pressure you put on it, it will not budge. That's exactly the U-shaped mechanism and layout on the cove. Interesting, huh? Okay, next. So the objective initially of an abwato is to dry out and desalt a marsh. Okay, and I'm throwing picture here. This is other abwato. It looks similar to Oak Islands, right? I'll let you pause and read if you want to read all that text. So originally it's to dry out a swamp. I went that already, the halophile plants. I think that's a double. This one is new. There was a Frenchman who lived there called Diereville, and in 1699 he explains the process of building abwato. How did they build those? They would plant 5 or 6 rows of whole large trees in the place through which the sea entered the marsh. They would plant large trees, and each row they lay other trees along, one on top of the other, and fill all the void with clay soil well beaten. That's why we found clay in the U-shaped platform, so that water would not be able to pass through it. They adjust the water in the middle of the structure so that it allows at low tide the water to march, so they would adjust the slope and the dimension and the position so that it would deprive the sea from getting in and allowing sweet water from flowing out. In use, the term abwato originally referring to the valve box only, but now it's extended to the full system. Some more picture. This is Oak Island. No, it's not. This is just a regular picture of an abwato system. But it bloody looks like Oak Island. The ocean, the coast, they dig some tunnel in, right? The abwato is hidden somewhere in the middle, the valves. And you got sweet water there that you want to empty out, right? And you got your swarm there. I mean, that looks very much like what we've got on Oak Island. Another picture of the remaining of an old abwato in Tantramar River, New Brunswick. And again, it's very similar in design than what we find on Oak Island, right? With those beams that have been worked out, part of trees. That's another that's coming from official site of Quebec, where they describe National Laboratory of Geography. That's how the abwato would work. That's another shape, and again, it's the same mechanism, right? You let the water, when the ocean comes up, it automatically closes that valve, and because of the slope, when the water is down, it's this fresh water from top that with gravity is going down. Interesting, huh? So let me dream a little bit and let me lay down my theory. That's my theory. So the theory is you got 2 islands to start with. You got people in the 1600 that live in the area and know exactly how to manipulate the hydraulics of the ocean. And for some reason, those people are people with the same knowledge. Might not be the farmers who created the island mechanism, but people who had the knowledge at the time from that La Rochelle stream of people, I believe, wanted to do 2 things at the same time. First, they want to reunite the 2 islands into one. And the technique they would use is to close, it just needs to close the island side, number 1, by Fred Nolans, and we see it's very narrow there, by bringing soil and debris and whatever. And the other side to close is where the road of the island goes right next to the base of the swamp. So you would only need to secure those, and I don't think it's very deep. And then you would install, and at the same time, what you want to do is create the booby trap mechanism for flooding the money pit in case somebody gets in and is not supposed to. And at the same time, you're creating a mechanism that allows to flush out the water that's in the money pit. So you're doing everything in one shot. The two islands together and the mechanism for flooding the pit. So you would close the gap first, install an abwato, and we know where it is. And by the way, Michael, this is for you. We had a discussion some weeks or months ago about believing what they found as the boxes and the layout that they dug up some seasons ago was not the water entry, it was the water exit of the island, and the entry was somewhere else. Actually, an abwato allows you not to have an entry separated from the exit. You can do both at the same time with the valve. So now I'm convinced there's only one place the water comes in and out. It is those cove U-shape type of boxes they found. So now that you close your gap, you install your abwato, but you're not drying out a swamp to begin with. You're drying out seawater that is just laying there, salted water. So you don't have access to those halophyte plants, the plants that normally live in a swamp and resist to salt water and etc. You don't have access to them because you don't have a swamp to begin with. You're creating a swamp. So that's why maybe, that's a hypothesis, right? You're using the coconut fiber from the coconut cargo of the ship you're about to sink in that soon-to-be swamp on the island. That's my belief, is that that's the ship. It had the coconut. It was, I don't know, I can imagine it was either robbed by pirates, if it's pirates who did that, and people helped them with the techniques, I don't know. But that could be. Then let the tide do the work. To dry out a swamp, it takes between 1 or 3 years, according to what I read in the records of how performant this missionary was. You're not drying out a swamp, you're drying out seawater. That's easier because the water is there, accessible right away. So maybe it took them only 3 months. Remember, this 4 tides a day. So you get twice the mechanism to suck the water out. Leave it like this for 6 months, 3 months, 1 year, I don't know. And then you pretty much get dried out the part of the sea between the two islands that now you reunited. Now that it's dry out, you're going to create, it's not dig actually, it's build, because if you dry out, you're at the rock bottom, you're at the bottom of the sea. So you build, and that's why they find stones there. You build the eye of the swamp, you build it up, you erect it, so that you get control on the maximum level of water in the swamp. It's an overflow system. So if there's water more than a certain level, it starts pouring in the whole of the swamp, the eye of the swamp. Why pouring in? Because the abwato will let it during the next tide being dried out of the swamp, that extra water, and flush into the ocean. That's the basin again. There must be some tank, reservoir, something underneath the island that collects either extra overflow water or rainwater or whatever water that needs to be dried out with the mechanism of the abwato. So you build the eye of the swamp hole. That's why it exists. It's the overflow so that your swamp doesn't get flooded itself years after year by rainwater or anything that could, at the end of the day, just make it too big, too high. That's what I believe about the eye of the swamp. Okay, and then you create a manual mechanism to act on the abwato's 2 planks. Not only you're letting Mother Nature do the work with the with the flood for flushing out the water that the soon-to-be swamp is, and you can regulate the level of water in the swamp. But on top of that, you're going to use that mechanism to flood the pit, and you're creating a booby trap with your 90-foot stone. All this is connected with the same type of mechanism. And because you want to let people in case you have to, you need a mechanism to disengage the abwato so that it doesn't act with the flood. And you can also booby trap with the weight of the 90-foot stone so that it triggers the abwato's trapdoors or the valves so that it would let the water in. Basically, you get control about what's happening thanks to the abwato. And that's my theory. At the same place at the right time, yet the people who had the knowledge how to do this. The mechanism of the abwato for farming is very similar in principle to the one we find on the island. Some specifics like the U shape shows that, yeah, it was reinforced to sustain the flood in and out. And you kill one bird with two stones because you can use that mechanism both to empty the water of the ocean from the reunited island and that pocket of water you made. You can control the height of the swamp by using the eye of the swamp structure and regulate the water level. And you can also booby trap again with the same mechanism, one shot, the money pit, and allow a user, like Ian in our drawing on the La Rochefoucauld map, to release the water out again using the abwato technique. So I think I'm getting there. I believe that that's something very worth considering. That mechanism is an abwato made by the French in the 1550, 1650 years. For what purpose we don't know. Who was their commander in chief we don't know. What were the motivation we don't know. But as an engineer, I say this is the same mechanism as we're seeing. Thanks for watching. Take care.